They Said We'd Never Make It, My Life with Erik Menendez by Tammy Menendez. Part 1. Building Foundations on Sand. Even in our sleep, pain that cannot forget falls drop by drop upon our hearts until finally in our own despair comes wisdom. Through the awful grace of God. Asilius. Chapter 1. The Guardians. Of the many things I dreamed as a child, I could never have imagined the Spartan existence of a prisoner's wife. A labored existence that secrets a person from the world almost as thoroughly as it separates them from their spouse. The isolation of prison is as inexplicable as the arcane and labyrinth rule by which it is run. Although intended purely for punishment, I have come to understand that prisons really exist to kill the one thing that defines us, our dreams. Slow and stealth-like, the walls and rules and barriers and boredom of prison rob the prisoner and his family of the imagery that breathes life into their daily existence. It is the death of the child in each of us. And like a disease, it is an illness that prisoners pass on to their families. On March 20th, 1996, Erik Menendez was convicted and ultimately sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At the time, our relationship seemed destined to become little more than a fleeting thing. Although the names Erik and Lyle Menendez had gained brutal proportions in American culture long before I exchanged my first correspondence with him, Erik was still only a footnote in my life, someone I wanted to understand better. I could never have believed that a simple letter to Erik Menendez would take me so far from the safety of my home in rural Minnesota. The journey began the day I received Erik's letter, or should I say, his response. It was many years before I could actually meet him, before our wandering friendship would accelerate and then catapult us into marriage. As much as I learned about his civility and compassion and pain through our correspondence, I can't say Erik was really a part of my life in any meaningful way until the startling summer day when I visited him in prison for the first time. The morning of my first visit is more complicated than I had expected. Despite its infamous name, I discovered that the prison is not only concealed from the town, it is a guarded secret. Naively, I had come to Northern California expecting to find street signs pointing the way. Instead, I find myself wandering into one business establishment after the other, asking the same question. Can you tell me how to get to Folsom Prison? Nobody can help me. After hours of confusion, I decided to try the one establishment that always offers directions. I wandered into the Exxon gas station and asked for directions to California State Prison, Sacramento, the old Folsom Prison. Prison, the man says. He scratched his head and glances at me as if I'm in the wrong state. I couldn't say I know where the prison is, but I don't think it's around here. My directions claim Folsom Prison is supposed to be here, and this is Folsom. I don't yet realize there is a veil of secrecy hiding the walls of the prison. It is its own city with its own name, Represa, and its own zip code. Represa doesn't even exist on many maps. The prison officials work hard to maintain this curtain of fog and iron. There is only one telltale sign that a maximum security prison might exist among the densely forested upper middle class neighborhoods of Folsom, California. A camp-like place card into which the words California State Prison, Sacramento are carved. This wooden signpost rests at the mouth of a quiet lane, artfully inconspicuous. Otherwise, there is no other indication of a prison, and no clue as to what really lies at the end of this country road. Although I turn onto the road to locate the prison and visit a man I know only from his handwriting, I still would laugh at the notion that I would one day marry Erik Menendez. Even during the years that will follow, when I turn onto the prison road, I find myself asking, what on earth am I doing here? But on this day, I am simply preparing to visit a friend I have never met, but have been corresponding with for many years. This isn't a date. There are no romantic sparks to our letters. Erik is the most unavailable man I've ever known, a prisoner. I remember a letter he had written months previously in which he mentioned a girlfriend. How sad, I thought to myself. He thinks he has a girlfriend. I was not surprised when he later wrote that the relationship had ended. What romance could possibly endure the separation of prison walls? A bit intimidated, by the notion of visiting a prison, I had asked an old friend of mine to take the trip with me. Brad is a quiet, kind guy who is a friend to the world. I know he will give me security and confidence. He has not, however, been pre-approved to visit Erik, and I know when we arrive he won't be allowed through the front gates, or whatever they call the doors to a modern prison. I have pictured a dark building with men in chains, menacing guards, and shadowy hallways filled with the pale, sunken faces of the prisoners staring from their buried cells. The home of the damned and the forgotten. The only image I have of prisons are from Hollywood movies. The idea that I am about to experience the real thing has me spooked and gazing over the dashboard with wide eyes. The prison road winds through a rolling hillside. Shards of light slice through the canopy of trees. Along the way, there are wild deer and grazing domesticated farm animals, along with loose groupings of odd-looking blackish creatures I assume are wild turkeys. Not your fluffy white Thanksgiving gobblers. These are lean, ungainly scavenger birds. One of them flies over the car. With wobbling wings, it drops to the grass, feet pedaling until it stumbles to a halt. As we round the hill, the beauty of the land is gradually cut away. A new reality unfolds. Massive gray buildings, barbed wire fences, and tall blue watchtowers. An obviously older, comparatively quaint prison with huge aging stone walls. And a moat-style rusted gate is dwarfed beside it. Old Folsom Prison, Erik had told me, was constructed in the 1870s. Its entry gateway is the medieval-looking facade depicted in many prison movies. Both prisons are nested between valley walls on the banks of the American River. As we drive into the valley, the two adjoining prisons loom larger, growing until they consume the landscape. There's something oddly gripping about them, almost magnetic, that leaves me unable to look away. I imagine Erik in a small cell, waiting for my visit. My thoughts quiet. What must it be like for him to live his life in a place like this? Is he more afraid than he lets on? How will prison have changed this man? So many people remember from their televisions over the many months of his infamous trial. Having been born in the arid wilderness of Minnesota among the 10,000 lakes that spawned a famous and rich array of life, I am used to the country roads and buildings hundreds of years in the making, raised on friendly know-your-neighbor streets by the docks of the port city of Duluth on Lake Superior. The spirit of the 19th century is alive in the architecture and attitude of my hometown. In the world to which I was accustomed, gates and locks and chains were not the norm. Rather than lock their doors, people placed big welcome mats on their front porch, and their children wandered free in the streets and neighborhoods until called home for dinner by a bell or whistle. This product of a Catholic school education, I heard only the faintest whisper that places like Folsom Prison existed. Despite being Erik's pen pal, the fact that he lived in a prison was never very real to me. This place, however, is unsettlingly real. Brad offers me a reassuring smile, but his eyes betray him. I know he doesn't feel it. It's the kind of encouraging smile your father gives you after you've already been strapped into the roller coaster car and there's no getting out. I smile back, sigh, and gaze at the rapidly expanding prison walls. Erik is in a small cell waiting for my visit. Like so many things I will come to understand about the prison system, I am about to run a gauntlet of delay and humiliation and frustrating silence that is required just to gain entry into a place no rational person should ever want to visit. We have no trouble finding a parking space. Brad walks me to the large visitor processing building. The room inside is crowded, abuzz with conversation, nervous tension saturating the air. Some people are sitting in chairs, others are in groups talking. The occasional wail of a small child lifts above the hum. The line to the processing counter is long. It drags us forward, in rhythmless, halting steps, as if time is an actual force restraining it. I have flashes of being in line at the post office and DMV. No one has informed me that I was supposed to have filled out a visitor's pass located in the back of the room, but that's okay, because I'm not getting in anyways. The guard behind the glass counter is kind, but he tells me that along with the visitor slip I don't have, my purse must be clear, plastic, and my outfit doesn't meet the guidelines for entry into the visiting room. I've come a very long way for this visit. You understand I'll have to go all the way back to my hotel, I say? The guard is genuinely contrite. I'm sorry, he says. Make sure you're back by 1. As it turns out, there are a myriad of restrictions that change daily depending on the guards that are working the first of many desks in the admissions process. From their decisions, there is no appeal and no reprieve. The dominance of the prison and their personnel are, in theory, reined in by the courts, but in practice, little can be done to suppress what amount to unfettered power. Sadly, during the coming years, I will become intimately familiar with the state's abuse and corruption, a system that all but sanctions aggression. Over the years, after repeated problems, I will learn to avoid complications by wearing the same style and colors, as if by entering prison I have become a sort of prisoner myself. Although Brad reminds me that Erik isn't going anywhere, I still find myself rushing to get changed and back to the prison for a process that will be far more arduous than I can imagine at this point. The guard is still at the counter. I don't realize at the time how fortunate I am on my first visit to encounter a guard that is actually willing to explain my infraction. Others, I will come to experience, are his polar opposite: hostile and rude, unwilling to explain why visitor admissions is being withheld, as if telling a visitor their pants are the wrong color would divulge a state secret. The guard this time around smiles approvingly, accepts my visiting slip, and tells me to have a seat until called. Brad waits with me. 30 minutes pass before I hear the name, Menendez. Among a long list issued by another guard, beyond this point, Brad cannot go. He slides his hand into his pocket and with a knowing smile wishes me good luck. Well, I say, I guess I'm off to see the wizard. At the far side of the room, I step into a small line and wait to be searched. I wonder what will happen next. What is the process to get in to see Erik? Will I be body searched? Touched? I have no idea. At the screening table, my plastic purse is opened, the contents examined all the way down to the money I'm carrying. I watch the people ahead of me, assuming they are more experienced, hoping to take clues as to what I am supposed to do next. I take off my shoes, belt, jacket, and put them on a tray to be searched. I am directed through a metal detector. The guard's eyes narrow on the few who fail this inspection. And then a more thorough search is conducted. It is a brief second chance, of sorts. If you don't pass the metal detector, you don't get in. Several would-be visitors are escorted away, victims of the wrong shirt, buttons, or some other mysterious failure. I take my purse, lace my shoes, and follow the stream of people towards an old school bus, painted blue and adorned with the identifying marks of the Folsom State Prison. We form another line and wait for a guard to load us in. Although it smells like a school bus outfitted with familiar big greenish-brown seats, the security in the front and rear offers testimony to its dual purposes. I find an empty seat at the back and gaze out the dusty window. During the brief ride into the complex, I get a better view of the prison's central facilities, the cell blocks. These are hexagon-shaped buildings with stark gray walls and very narrow windows. These are the cell windows Erik describes in his letters. Prisoners spend hours peering longingly out of them, at a world they can see, but no longer touch. The buildings are ringed by parallel chain-linked fences, topped with barbed razored coils. A single smaller electrical fence runs between them. Small warning signs with an illustration of a figure being electrocuted are posted on the fence. Tall blue watchtowers stand at various corners like giant guards, the unwavering eye of a searchlight mounted above. In our years of correspondence, Erik has never mentioned the austerity, the utter bleakness of his confinement. My spirits sink. I cannot turn my eyes away. It's as if all the color has been peeled from this place, leaving dismal shades of gray. The prison is not ghastly. It's just grim. Most disquieting is the hopelessness it injects in me. I find it incredible that in this environment, Erik has managed to keep his letters lighthearted, upbeat, and increasingly spiritual. How do you find God in a place like this? Just the same, he's also kept me laughing. He's even softened my concerns for him, with his growing belief that the world, despite the tragedy of human failings, is an inherently decent place. His letters are always reassuring, always positive, always hopeful. Yet his words sometimes betray a profound sadness. He once wrote me, "The reality that a single act could be so devastating to so many, so final and awful, eats at me still. It's a moment in time I would give my life to reverse. I have tried, if only selfishly, to ease my guilt. But remorse is a hollow word compared to the collapse in me. I am wrung out. Tears, sweat, prayers long ago turned to self-loathing. I am a weak man, unable to give back the life I took. Sometimes I despise myself, even more for my pain. I am wholly unworthy of it. These stone walls think they imprison me, but walls can be torn down. My real prison feeds in me. I do believe in God, in life that survives death. My parents have come to me in dreams. I have actually seen my mother in spirit. A delusion? Maybe. But the images were very real. Hers is a different sort of heaven that I was thought to believe. Not so much a place with harps and angels, as it is a world of light. Home is what I sense it is. Maybe even a home for me too. It is the only vision I hold on to. A crutch perhaps. But if there is any hope for peace in me, where else am I going to find it? The quality and content of his letters are what motivate me to continue corresponding with him. He seemed completely unable to mitigate his actions. Through his letters, I learned his interest lay in nature, animals, and his spiritual discovery. With each new letter, a more detailed portrait of Erik emerged. His letters are anything but fluff, revealing the writer, the man, with raw, vivid language. In a culture devoted to trivial pursuits and pain avoidance, I found Erik's letters compellingly blunt. I also get the sense that he no longer feels the need to be the hero of his stories. He has told me of the misadventures in his life with openness and humor, and has made me forget about the tragedies in mine. Whether writing about a mouse he left food for, who decided to eat his only candy bar instead, his brief trips on medical runs to deal with the very serious problem of his Crohn's disease, or the deer he could see playing on the hill beyond the prison walls. His letters have made me laugh and smile, and he has given me a glimpse of a man who was very different than the one I saw on television. A funny, sensitive guy who needed the healing of a loyal friend. Maybe it's for this reason that I initially became his friend. I have always believed that Erik's incarceration is merely a physical manifestation of the emotional prison he has lived in since he was a boy. The ugly visions of childhood sexual abuse, whippings, and the tragic crime he committed as a teenager against the two people who serially tortured and hurt him were acts that imprisoned him long before he was incarcerated. His inner prison, it seemed, was many miles deep. Visiting bunker, the bus driver calls out. We've stopped before a pair of glass doors. The entrance appears to tunnel beneath the prison. On either side is a sloping earthen wall. The chain-linked electrified fence towers above. I step off the bus, wide-eyed, sneaking glances about me. I have the impression of heading behind enemy lines. I follow the train of fellow visitors through the doors. Another guard waits to process us again inside. One by one, we maneuver through the same routine. Shoes, jacket, belt off, and then through another metal detector. We wait in a holding area for a guard to come down from the visiting area to escort us to the visiting room. The people around me are quite tense. This is always the longest part, says a woman beside me. Unless we get lucky and one of the good guards is working up in the visiting room today. 10 minutes pass. Patience has never been my strong suit, but on this day it hardly mattered. I am so nervous that time stands still. In a moment, I will be greeted by a man I feel like I already know, but have never met. What do I say to him? Will I like him? What does he look like in person? Do I shake his hand or hug him? He looks so thin, so young, so lonely on television, but his letters reflect a mind weathered by horror and death and, of course, two massively publicized trials over 8 years of incarceration. Whatever innocence and naivety remained in that 18-year-old boy have been drummed away. Finally, a tall, thin-shouldered officer walks towards the group of visitors. A heavy metal door opens to the side of us, and another slams loudly shut. We file into an elevator car and ride upstairs as one group. The doors part onto a wide vacant lobby. We spill out and walk to a brown security door with a large square window. How close is the visiting room? Will Erik be waiting for me? I am not just nervous and angsty. I am terrified. If I could go back through the doors and elevators and waiting rooms, through the bus and the gates and the long, lonely drive out to the secret city of Repressa, I would do it. I would go back and never return. I feel at any minute I could ask one of the guards to go back. If I was alone, I would surely have asked by now, but I am surrounded by visitors, who are also here only temporarily. People who seem comfortable behind the doors and bars are in silence. The doors open electronically, controlled by a guard seated behind the glass of a long, narrow control booth. As we enter this area, each person holds up their ID to the guards behind the glass. I remove my passport from my plastic purse and turn it up to the window for the officer to view. Behind us, the door racks to a close. Another in front slides open. We turn a corner. Abruptly, a large, brightly lit room with high ceilings and a surprising amount of color sweeps out before me. It looks just like a cafeteria, only bigger, with vibes that scream prison. It may have that prison feel, though, because of the 3 guards sitting at what is obviously the front desk. I glance around the room, suddenly anxious. I won't recognize Erik. What if he looks different? But then, I'm not the one who should be worrying. It's me he will not recognize. The crowd disperses. It's quickly clear that Erik is not in the room. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. Sit down? Where? Anywhere? Most of the other visitors are heading to the front desk. I follow them. Name? The officer asks me. My name? He stops, then gives me an amused, you haven't done this before smile. He's a smartly groomed officer in a pressed uniform. The name of the inmate you're visiting. Oh, Erik Menendez. Ah, he says, nodding, eyes hesitating on my face. Menendez, let's see. I've got you at table 24. I turn and gaze across the wide room. Knee-high tables are evenly spaced throughout, each numbered. There are roughly 40 tables in the room, a third of which are occupied. I avoid the crowd, trying to be inconspicuous, and I glance at table numbers. The room is a sea of chatter and commotion. As I meander by, people stare at me from their tables. I feel out of place, lost. Many of these men are prisoners. I know. There are dozens of people in the large room. I'm afraid to look at any of them. I really don't know how to act. I say to myself, Tammy, calm down, relax. But I can't. I feel suffocated, unnerved. I quickly give up my search. Brightly lit vending machines adorn the nearest wall, feigning nonchalance, but not really caring that much. I walk to them. I breathe slowly and look around the room again. Now that I notice it, most of the men in the room are wearing blue shirts, snap buttons up the front, and various shades of dark blue jeans. I remain by the vending machine, too nervous to sit down. Hopefully, at any moment, Erik will be here, probably entering the room from that door behind the officer's desk. That man in blue appears to be using. I have no idea what I will say to him, no idea how to act. Part of me wants to bolt from the room and never come back. Tammy, what are you doing in this place? I've no time to answer my own question. At that moment, Erik steps from the doorway at the far side of the room.